or don't forget about it. It's more fun to talk about happy, clappy, gentle Jesus. But we need to address the issues that are part of our reality of our existence, the reality of broken relationships, the reality of divorce. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. And I'm going to talk about a bit of history, a bit of anecdotes that I think are fascinating, which you just have to put up with. Poor Patty's already heard this, so if she falls asleep, I'll forgive her. Part history, part biblical exegesis, and also a story that I think I've shared with some of you before that I think illustrates this. Our gospel reading today is from Mark, chapter 10. Jesus is being attacked by the lawyers once again. The lawyers are ganging up on him, and they're asking him questions because Jesus has said, I've come not to end the law, but to fulfill the law. And not one jot, not one tittle of the law of Moses is going to be changed. Rather, I am stepping into its place and fulfilling the law. And the lawyers are throwing hardballs at him. What about divorce, Moses? No, Jesus. What about divorce, Jesus? What do you say about divorce? Because then, as now, people got divorced. And Jesus says, what do the scriptures say? The scriptures say that Moses allowed you to write a certificate of divorce. You could divorce your husband or your wife, but he did that because of the hardness of your heart. Why did Jesus say this? Was Jesus condemning divorce? Did Jesus at this stage issue a commandment, thou shalt not get divorced? He said some stuff like that. Thou shalt not kill anybody. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love thy neighbor as thyself. He did not issue a commandment of divorce. Jesus said, I hate divorce. The purpose of marriage is that a man and a woman come together to the mutual exclusion of everybody else for life. That's the way it should be. That's the ideal. That's what I hope for you. But guess what? People are broken. And for the hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to get divorced. Jesus did not forbid divorce. Neither did he encourage divorce. Divorce was a reality then as now. Now the church has had a difficult time in trying to figure out what to do with this. And we're different from other traditions on this exact point. Before I went to seminary, I started my ordination process when I was 21. So the bishop in Philadelphia, he said, come back when you were 25. Because we saw no one who was that young. At 21, I knew everything. And, there's nothing I knew it all, man. You want advice on ravens and babies? Marital advice? Yes, baby. So there might have been some wisdom, but I started the process when I was 25. In Philadelphia, they make you study at night as you do stuff during the day before they send you off to seminary. Now, I lived in the suburbs, so I studied at Villanova University at night with the Augustinian fathers. And they had a great deal of fun teasing me about being an Episcopalian. Because, you should be a Catholic because it's so straightforward. You know what's up, you know what's down, you know what's right, you know what's wrong. Take divorce. We know that it's wrong. If you get divorced, boom, and you get remarried, you never darken in this church again. I'm sorry, once and done, that's it. But you Episcopalians, you get married like rabbits every other week. And I would say, if it weren't for you guys, half the people of our congregation wouldn't show up because half the people are divorced Catholics at any one time. Well, that's not true. Maybe a third. But the thing that my Augustinian brothers, confreres, would throw at me was, well, the Episcopal Church is just around because of Henry VIII. Henry VIII wanted a divorce. He couldn't get one, so he became an Episcopalian, like a lot of Catholics do. Well, that's sort of, but not completely true. What's the true story about Henry VIII? Henry VIII had an older brother. Henry VIII's father was Henry VII. Henry VII was King of England. He wanted to sign a deal with Spain.
And part of the deal was the King of Spain would ship his daughter, Catherine of Aragon, up north to England, and she'd marry Henry's older brother, Arthur. Arthur, the Prince of Wales. Arthur died. And Henry's father said to Henry, "You're marrying Catherine." Henry didn't like this idea. Catherine was a little bit older than he was. He had his own fun that he wanted to do, and he didn't want to marry his brother's wife. And besides, the book of Leviticus quite clearly says, "You shall not lay with your brother's wife." You may not marry your brother's wife. It is one of the forbidden relationships. You can't marry your mother-in-law, your daughter, your sister, the things that are no-nos. There's an out. Then as now, rich people had outs. You could appeal to Rome and get a special dispensation. The treaty with Spain was worth Henry being miserable, Dad thought. And so the Pope gave a special dispensation, getting rid of the prohibition of marrying your brother's wife, so Henry could marry Catherine. Then they were married for 23 years, and they had a child, Mary. But Henry, all his life, even till his death, considered himself a good Catholic. In fact, he considered himself a better Catholic than the Pope and these priests. He thought these priests in England, he thought the Pope, they were just these corrupt Italians. And you just can't trust the Italians. And Henry started to have a crisis of conscience. And it came about just when he met Anne Boleyn. Funny that. And he wrote to the Pope and said, my wife, Catherine has entered menopause. She can't have any children anymore. We've only got a girl. I need a male heir. And God is punishing me for marrying my brother's sister by not giving me a male son. And the only way to fix this and get right with God is to have an annulment after 23 years. Now, the head of the Catholic Church in England, Cardinal Wolsey, said, that makes perfect sense. Just fill in the forms, pay the fee, and we'll send it to Rome to get countersigned. So everything was all set. Henry could still be a good Catholic, get an annulment, marry Anne Boleyn, and try to have another family. While he was at it, he should have bought a motorcycle. I mean, all these midlife crises. Get it all over with at once. Well, guess what happened in Rome? Catherine had a nephew who grew up to be Emperor Charles V of Spain. And Charles had an army that happened to be in Italy at the time that happened to be on the doorsteps of the Vatican. And so Charles said, Your Holiness, if I were you, I wouldn't sign this to annulment. You wouldn't want anything to happen to this nice cathedral that you're building, would you? And being under military pressure, the Pope declined to give an annulment. Well, Henry was so angry, he thought, you Catholics are so corrupt! I'm no longer going to recognize the authority of the Pope. We're going to do it right. We're English after all. We know better than you Italians. Seriously, that's the mindset. Henry never was a Protestant. In fact, he persecuted the Protestants of England. England became the Church of England only after Henry died, and his son Edward, his son Edward was a true Protestant, and brought in all these people from Europe, these Calvinists, and people from Scotland, these Presbyterians. Then Edward died, and his daughter Mary, who was a Roman Catholic, switched it all back to Catholicism. And she died, and his third child, Elizabeth, split it down the middle between the Protestantism of her brother Edward and the Catholicism of her sister Mary. You add the two together, what do you get? The Episcopal Church. It wasn't for 40 or 50 years after Edward's death that we got what we got today. Now, church history and doctrines like making sausages, you just don't want to know what's inside of it sometimes. So whenever my good Augustinian friends would tell me, oh, George, how could you be part of a church that is so self-evidently political, before I would fall out laughing, I would say, well, this happened a second time in church history. there was a man named Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte. He was a Frenchman. And he was a young officer, and he fell in love with this beautiful older woman named Josephine. And they were married, but it was a civil service. They were married, and Napoleon grew up to be Emperor Napoleon of France. And the church said, you know, Napoleon, you really should have a church marriage, you know. That's the right thing to do. A civil marriage is okay, but, you know, just doing it at the courthouse doesn't quite count in God's eyes. You got to do it in church. So in 1804, Napoleon and Josephine were married in church by the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris. 1809, Napoleon needs an heir, and Josephine had reached the age of life where she's not going to have any more children. So Napoleon goes to the Cardinal Archbishop and says, Josephine lied on the marriage license. She misstated her age. She's really 4 years older. So our civil marriage is a fraud. Therefore, our church marriage should be annulled. Even though they were married about 10 to 15 years before they had a church marriage. And the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris said, that sounds like a reasonable idea. And he sent it off to be Rome to be countersigned, and guess what? Guess whose army happened to be on the doorstep of the Vatican at that year? Napoleon's, and guess who was given an annulment? Napoleon, and he was given an annulment and married Maria Louise, the daughter of the King of Austria, and he had his son. And it was only after Napoleon wound up on exile in St. Helena that the Catholic Church said, oops, we made a mistake. We're annulling our annulment. You're still married to Josephine, and we're annulling your second marriage. And they fixed it after the fact. But the circumstances for Napoleon Bonaparte and Henry VIII were roughly the same. Now, why is this historical interlude of any interest? I find it mildly fascinating. But at the same time, it speaks to the fact that the church has never had an incontrovertible, solid understanding of marriage and divorce. It has moved with the times and the circumstances, either through bad reasons, having an army on your doorstep, or good reasons. The Episcopal Church, up until the Second World War, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to get. You never got a divorce, you got an annulment. And what that meant was that you were unable, your marriage was not physically consummated. You got married, but then your husband got hit, ran off after the reception. Essentially, that's how hard it was. Because it was never physically consummated. That was the standard for the first half of the 20th century. Then World War II happened. And in World War II, we had something that was completely unprecedented. All these young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, meet and they want to get married before they're shipped overseas. And they get married after knowing each other maybe 3-4 dates. They're married, and they come back in 1945, and guess what? They don't know who they married. I mean, this person, it was completely different. And 1945 was the best year for divorces in the United States until the 60s. Why? Because of all these mistaken GI marriages. Have you ever seen the movie The Best Years of Our Lives with Dana Andrews? He's a pilot. He comes back in 1945. He had married his girlfriend. We met at an army base, and he comes back and he finds he has nothing in common with this woman. And it's not that they hate each other, but this, it was a mistake. And the church, from the ground up, began to say, look, we need, and they would start bugging their bishops, look, we need to develop a way, because what we're saying is that you can be forgiven of murder, you can be forgiven of all these grievous, terrible sins, but if you got married and you blew it, you got to carry that bag on your shoulder the rest of your life. And beginning in the late 40s, the Episcopal Church, under pastoral reasons, began permitting divorced people to remarry in church. It took about 10, 15 years. It wasn't until the late 50s till we had a good theology to say why. We just moved in that direction. Now, in the United States, the Episcopal Church differs from diocese to diocese to diocese. Each diocese, because we all have the same rules. They're national rules, but how we interpret them differs. I have a friend from seminary days, lovely woman. She's an Episcopal priest. She's in San Francisco. She's been married 5 times. If I said to Bishop Brewer, I was leaving my wife to marry somebody else, he would say, well, George, the Lord is telling me that you need to take up your vocation as a taxi driver. Seriously, were I to get divorced, I would have to resign in my parish, and if I were at fault in the divorce, I would be deposed from the ministry. That's the rule in the Episcopal Church in Central Florida. I don't know what the limit is in San Francisco. I don't think anyone's reached it yet. But it's the same definition of morally upright life. And how we define it here differs from how they define it there. We don't have any specific rules against homosexual clergy. We have the same rules as the Diocese of New York does, and other places. But we define what it means to be morally upright to say that does not include sexually active homosexuals in the priesthood. And that's really not going to change around here, because we have our local churches. They're different, meaning the diocese. So where does this all come down to? How can we, with a straight face, talk about Henry VIII and Napoleon and the Second World War? What is really Jesus talking about? What is the Bible telling us? Because at the end of the day, that's what Scripture is there for, to guide us. The church can and will screw things up royally. I spent 25 years in it, and I know most of the bishops of the Episcopal Church. And frankly, I usually leave meetings with my hand over my wallet. Now, there are good and kind, holy men and women in the ministry, but there are men and women, meaning they're fallen, fragile, failed, broken people, and they do and will make mistakes. That's why we don't have a pope. We don't have an infallible one person, one group, one voice. We have your conscience. We have the Bible, and we have our liturgy, our Book of Common Prayer. And you are asked to use your brain, your life experience, your understanding of God speaking to you. And just because I disagree with you doesn't make me right and you wrong. Well, you're wrong if you don't agree with me. But we don't have an infallible magisterium. We have the conscience of each individual believer. What is Jesus talking about? Jesus says in Matthew's Gospel, I hate divorce. Why does he hate divorce? Because of the destruction it causes in the lives of people. Most times there is an innocent party in a divorce. Not every time. But I've seen enough of them to know that people's lives are destroyed by being rejected by their husband, by their wife. I share with you, my brother Andy came up and spent Easter with us this past year. And we sort of scratched our head, where's your family? His wife said she kicked me out. And he said, I wish I was a drunk. I wish I was fooling around. I wish there was something I could point to other than the fact that she just doesn't want me around. And the destruction that has had on his life and on their children, it's going to be with him the rest of his life. What does Jesus hate? He hates the pain. He hates the misery. He hates the destruction that is caused by the hardness of heart where people get divorced. It's not over when you get divorced. That's how we differ on matters of canon law from other churches. You get a second chance. You get even more. In our diocese, for instance, divorcees can get remarried in this church. There's one exception. Prince Charles and Camilla could not have gotten married here. Why? Because he was fooling around while he was still married to Diana. and the church will not, in Central Florida, marry a couple who have left one, trading up your Cadillac or something. They won't bless divorce, but if you get married and you get divorced and life goes on and you meet a new person in your relationship, it is perfectly acceptable and lawful and licit to be married in the church because God forgives those who repent of their sins. I've shared the story with some of you in the past about a person I've met. In 2004, I have a sideline as a writer. And I write for magazines and newspapers, and I'm not as active as I once was. This is a pretty intensive job I have right now. But in 2004, I went up to a dinner being held by a publisher that had a section of a book. And there was a big dinner for the, we didn't get paid anything, so I guess the dinner was half gratitude because the royalties stink in the religion, right? And there was a dinner up at one of these wonderful hotels in New York. I have to look in my sock drawer to see which it is, because I've got the book of matches. It might have been the Waldorf or the Pierre or the Plaza. I have to look to see which one it was, because it's not one of these places I go to every weekend. I don't know why. Well, I'm having this dinner, and I'm a single man. Susan's at home with our children. We were about 5 or 6 years old at the time. And it's a big table up near the front of the podium, and as a single man, I'm easy to seat, fill a spot. And I come a little early, and there's a name tag next to me, Jennifer O'Neill. Doesn't mean anything to me. Jennifer O'Neill can mean anything, except she's one of the authors. And Jennifer O'Neill finally comes to the table, and I was sitting down, and I stood up, and my stomach went up, and my chin went out, and I took off my glasses, and I tried to look 20 years younger, because this was a beautiful, striking woman. She might have been about 20 years older than I am, but just one of those people whom my wife would call stunning. Just this sort of pow in-person woman that you see. You don't see a lot of them in Okeechobee. That's where I was at the time. So maybe, I was out of practice. But I'm staring at her because I know her from somewhere. I know this woman. And we sit down and the dinner starts and we hear the speakers and we begin to chat about the book business. And I say, well, tell me, what have you got? She says, well, I've got my autobiography. And we talk a bit about how books work. And she had written her life story. I said, well, tell me about it. She said, you can buy the book. I said, I will anyway. But tell me about it. And I said, and I've got to ask you, I know you, don't I? You're somebody. You're famous, aren't you? She said, well, I was in the movies. Really? Which one? I said, she said her first movie was Rio Lobo. And my brain begins to work. And I can remember Dean Martin. I remember John Wayne. I remember some horses and cowboys, but I don't remember any girls. And unless it's Moreno Holt, O'Sullivan, or Shirley Temple, I remember no girls in any John Wayne movie. I said, well, what else did you do? He said, well, my big film was called The Summer of '42. And I said, oh my God, that was the first dirty movie I ever saw. Yes, I was the older woman, she said. Oh, that's that. And yes, that's you. For those who don't know, The Summer of '42 was a film that came out in 1971. And it was about a teenage boy who I probably was acting like at that moment, who had an infatuation, I think they were in Cape Cod somewhere, with a young woman whose husband was off fighting in the war. She was the older woman. And during the movie, she learns her husband is killed in action, and the affair is unconsummated. It's all one-sided. It's all in the mind of the young boy, but it was a wonderful movie, but it was the first R-rated movie. I snuck into the Ardmore Theater with my friends from Episcopal Academy. We got out early one day. They could let you smoke cigarettes in the balcony in the Ardmore Theater if you were a little boy. And it's a wonder why the police never raided them, because there are all these boys in blazers and school ties smoking cigarettes who are 12 years old in the balcony. Another story. And I
She said, no, my book is about my spiritual life. I said, well, tell me what it's about. She said, well, tell me about yourself. She said, well, my father was a Brazilian diplomat at the UN. My mother was English. And I grew up in Manhattan. And so at this point, we're way out of Okeechobee, folks. And she went on to say that when I was 15, I went to a birthday party of one of my girlfriends. And her father was an executive with the Eileen Ford Agency. And by the time my mother came to pick me up, I had a modeling contract. And before my 16th birthday, I appeared on the cover of Cosmopolitan and Vogue in 17. And I began a career as a high fashion model. It's the mid-1960s, and her days were spent in Rome and Paris and Milan and New York. And she got her first role in Rio Lobo with John Wayne, and this producer who she was dating at the time said to her, babe, I got the part for you! This is going to make your career! You are going to play the older woman in The Summer of 42, which is going to be the smash boffo hit of the summer of 71. And she said, that's great, but I'm pregnant. He said, here's $25,000. Go to Switzerland, take care of it. Filming starts in Nantucket in 3 months. And she had a choice to make. Hollywood and a baby. She went on to ask, well, will you marry me? And he said, well, my wife really wouldn't. You know, that really wouldn't quite do. Make it go away. Here's the money. And she had a choice between an abortion and stardom and a baby. And there are not many high fashion models with stretch marks, bringing toddlers to photo shoots. This is the early 70s, late 60s. It was a different world. And she chose an abortion. And she said, I had such wonderful reviews from the drama critics because I looked so miserable in those scenes where I'm supposed to be grieving the death of my husband, but I was grieving the death of my child, my kid. And my career never took off the way I wanted it to. Yes, I did movies, NBC Movie of the Week. Yes, I appeared as a guest star on The Love Boat. Finally, I wound up as a star on the Hollywood squares, and I knew my career was in the tank. And I got married, and I got divorced, I got married, and I got divorced. I lived the Hollywood party scene. And finally, sometime in the late 80s, I was in a hotel in Beverly Hills, and I put a gun to my head, and I was going to kill myself. And I couldn't even do that. The last moment, I pulled the pistol aside, and the bullet went up into the ceiling. They took me to the Betty Ford Clinic to dry out. And I was a has-been, and I wasn't even 30 years old. My looks were gone for Hollywood. My career was over. You never recover from Hollywood squares. And it was time for me to die. I've been married 8 times to 7 different men. How'd that work? Well, she got married, divorced, married a new man, divorced him, married one of the old guys, then divorced him again. So 7 husbands, 8 marriages, not even 30. And they sent me to a clinic, and I met a man. And I also found Jesus Christ. And I've been married to that man now. At that point, it was 15 years. It's probably 30, 40 years now. And we got married at All Saints Episcopal Church in Beverly Hills. Not our Beverly Hills, the other one. And she said, oh, it was wonderful. My maid of honor was Elizabeth Taylor, and we were joking because now I was married more than she was. And it was so wonderful when she described her white bridal gown, and I guess I made a face. Because, you know, California is another country, it's another planet, but even the Episcopal Church has got standards, don't they? Number 9, you just don't wear a white dress, do you? Oh, that's what the TV shows tell me. She said, I know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. When I accepted Jesus
Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I repented of my sins, I was washed clean by the blood of He who died on the cross and took upon Himself all the guilt, all the pain of my abortions, of my marriage, of my drug addiction, of my attempted suicide. All that is wiped away, covered by the blood of my Redeemer, Jesus Christ. I deserve a white wedding dress the ninth time down the aisle, because that was the time I went down walking with Christ in my heart. She's absolutely right. Now, I don't think Elizabeth, well, she's now dead, but I don't think Elizabeth Taylor is going to be a bridesmaid here any day soon. I don't think that sort of a problem is our problem. But we live in a world of so many failed and broken relationships. And if the church piles on top of that, and by saying, oh, you screwed up once, you're done, the church is not there for you, it is a weight upon you. And the church of Jesus Christ is not, Christ came not to condemn you, but to lead you to the path of salvation. You will be judged one day. You will be judged at the end of time when Christ will judge the quick and the dead. But if you plead the blood of Jesus Christ, your sins, no matter how heinous, are forgiven. And you don't have to wait till the end of time. You accept Christ now, your life begins anew. That's what the Bible teaches us. That's completely clear. How we think on the contentious issues of the day. We had our Bible study today on capital punishment, and we debated fry him or let him go. They're both valid positions, both theologically, biblically grounded, and because of that we can agree to disagree. And there's so many issues like that. Christ came not to give us an instruction on diets or on finances or anything like that. He came to give us the key gift of eternal life. How we organize our world is according to certain principles. Foremost is love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. All this other stuff is second and third and fourth level. And they're not reason enough to deny Christ to others. What do we teach in this church? What do we understand in this church, this diocese, this denomination? That marriage is the greatest thing that can happen to you. I know from my experience, I've been married for 34 years, and I have to tell you, it's the best thing that has ever happened in my life. Everything that has been good has come from that relationship that God has given me. Now, Susan and I got married when we were 21 or 22. We just graduated from college. And we are completely different people. Completely different people in temperament and personality. I'm a little different down here. But as we have spent our life together, we have attempted to work together in love and fellowship and mutual respect. And that is something that has not been easy. You have to work on it. You have to work. My brother was raised exactly like me, has the same moral worldview, has the same everything, except I'm an inch taller because I'm the older brother. Yet his marriage of 20 years ended when his wife told him not to come home. Who am I to judge? Who am I to say? Who am I to put a weight on his heart that God now hates you because you screwed up? It's not the way it works in our church. God loves you. Now, we have the Prince Charles rule. So you may not leave your wife to marry your secretary and think it's a good thing. It's not, don't do it. But we're talking about most people. Their marriages fall apart for reasons that can be good or stupid. Life goes on, but Christ is there for them. Don't anyone ever let you say that the church hates you because you've been divorced. It doesn't. It never will. Because Christ loves you. here's the one exception. If you made a stupid mistake when you're 22 years old.